Up next, the Battlestar Galactica Landram. Well, hey guys, and welcome back to another Interstellar Modeler. So, continuing my series now of featuring a couple of kits from Cozmic Scale Models. As mentioned in the last video, my first build is going to be the Battlestar Galactica Colonial Landram, as seen from the original Battlestar Galactica series. This is a 1/56 scale kit, and as I previewed it in the last video, you saw there's not a lot of parts, so it should be a pretty straightforward and quick build. I plan on, of course, painting and detailing it, but also plan on lighting it. I'll give you some more information about that shortly. And we'll wrap up the build with creating a display base. For the display base, I kicked around a couple of ideas. My first was to create something that represented Carillon, as we saw in the series premiere, but I thought it'd be more interesting to create a snow-based display base, as we saw on Gun on Ice Planet Zero. So, I'm ready to get started here, and I know it took a little while to get this video on the channel. My wife and I took a week off last week to celebrate our birthdays as we took a cruise down to the Caribbean on the Norwegian cruise line. It was a lot of fun. I had a great time, and that's why I'm wearing this t-shirt here from the Chichén Itzá Mayan ruins, and I figured since the Mayans were mentioned at the very beginning of Battlestar Galactica, it'd be appropriate to wear the shirt here since I don't have a Battlestar Galactica shirt. Alright, well, let's go ahead and get started with our build. I decided to begin with creating the lighting element for the headlights. Now, there aren't a ton of reference pictures of the Landram, but here is a screenshot of how the lights were lit. You, of course, have the main row of headlights, along with several above the main window. So let's go ahead and get started here with the main headlights by following the same method I used to create the lights for the exhaust ports of the Galileo. I first cut a piece of styrene to fit behind the headlights, then used a mechanical pencil to dot where the SMDs need to be placed. This was then followed by securing them with superglue, attaching them in a row like this. The string of SMDs that I'm using here are from Evans Designs, which usually comes in a group of 12, but I asked if they could cut it to a group of 6 instead, and they were kind enough to do so, and they charged me only $8 instead of $17 that it cost for the 12. The link to the string is below. Alright, and this is how it turned out. So let's go ahead and do a quick light test. There is, of course, a bit of light blocking that needs to be done here, but as you can see, the string adequately illuminates that front row. Now for the smaller lights above the window, I am going to be using the Pico size SMDs, which I am waiting to receive. It took me a little time to decide what to do about those, and so I just ordered them yesterday, and I plan on gluing them to a styrene rod that will fit right behind those. Well, in the meantime, I decided to proceed with light blocking, and I felt the best way to do this in this case was to resort to tulip paint, which can be placed right behind those headlights, and this is why I chose to use tulip paint rather than foil tape. And once this was completed, I then painted a coat of black paint over the entire model to further help with light blocking, and I also think this would be a good way to prep for applying the base color. Alright, well, before moving on to painting, because I'm ready to do that, I want to make mention of something I forgot to explain here, is that I actually had to cut out a piece of the model here. I did record that. Unfortunately, I deleted the recording, but to accomplish that, I used this saw tool I got on Amazon. It comes with these different blades, and it was very easy to cut free that piece. This material is not very hard to cut through, and I did hang on to it. You can see that I have it in the baggie right here, but opening that up gives you a lot more room to maneuver in there, especially made it a lot easier to size that styrene that I needed to have in place for the lights that you saw, and also for light blocking. Now, I may reinstall that piece, or I just might put another piece of styrene there. You're not really going to see that area, but you might end up getting light spillage onto the tracks or from behind here, and we don't want it. We don't want that. Okay, well, I'm ready now to move on to painting, so let's talk about the color I'm going to be using for the main body. Now, as I said, there aren't a lot of reference pictures, and but you can see I found a few here. A couple of these show the Landram painted in like a blue-gray color. And I came across this other picture with these two lucky kids sitting on top of the Landram here, and you can see the Landram looks like it's painted in a white or light gray color. So I decided to go for that versus the blue-gray color. because when you look at these screenshots, I took a couple more from the episode, you can see the Landram is a light gray color. Now what's interesting is you'll notice it looks like it has some camouflage paint that had been applied to the back section of the Landram. You can see it here. But because I can't really find any good pictures of that to give me a guide on how to apply that, I'm just going to go ahead and leave that off. So for the color, most of it's going to be made of this white gray from Vallejo, but I think I'm going to mix in a little bit of this pale blue gray into it. And that will be the base color, and then we're going to do some snow effects on top of all of that. But before we do anything else, I want to go ahead and start on the tracks, and just bear with me. I am not someone who builds tank models. It's been a long time since I built a tank model, but I've been watching some videos on how to paint tank tracks. And so what I'm going to start off with is painting it with a burnt umber, and moving on from there with various washes to try to make these look realistic. Well, this is how the tracks turned out, and I started out with that burnt umber, and then I applied Vallejo's oily steel for the wheels here, and then this was all washed over with this wash from Vallejo. And then the last step was just to randomly apply and dry brush some brass and some steel, just to give some variation of color there along the tracks. So I think that'll work well. Most of this is going to be covered or obscured somewhat by the snow effect I'll be adding in here into the display. So I think for now that will do. Okay, here now is the final color applied to the exterior of the Landram, and I went ahead and applied a gloss coat so that the decals can be put into place. Well, here are the decals now in place. There are 4 of them, and just bear in mind that the Landram actually had no markings in the episode. Gun on Ice Planet 0, but I just thought it looked more interesting with the decals in place, so I decided to go with them. Well, since I have to wait for those lights, there's not much more I'm going to do on this. I do need to do some weathering, but I'd like to get a couple other things out of the way first before we move on to that step. So I'm going to set this aside for a little bit here, and we're going to work on the display. So what I have here is some foamular, and I'm thinking we could have the Landram here, kind of in the center, and up in an angle like this. So we're going to have to build up the terrain underneath it. So to build up that terrain, I'll be using some of this air dry clay, and for the snow, we'll be using this stuff from Precision Ice and Snow. If you recall, I used this way back when with the snow speeder. Also used this on the snow speeder as well. This is Chrysel Ice and Snow Wash. This is going to be applied to our Landram here, and it's supposed to mimic the buildup of ice and snow along the various edges and corners. So we'll be using a combination of materials here. Let's go ahead and get started with building this up. Well, after a bit of work here, shaping and molding, this is how it is looking so far. And I'm going to give this some time to dry. It's going to take overnight at least, and I'll get back to work on it in the morning. Well, it is the next day now, and it's looking pretty dry, although some of the thicker parts are still a little soft, so I'm going to leave this out in the sun to dry a little further. In the meantime, let me show you how the wiring's all going to work out. I did cut the opening out for the AAA battery pack that's going to be powering our LEDs. The wires from here are going to run to the switch, which we mounted on the side, and I used my foam cutter to create some channels here for the wire as they feed through this opening to the Landram. Now, I do plan on adding some styrene plastic here all along the side here so it'll look nice and finished, and it'll conceal all of this here on the side. So before adding the snow effects, I thought I would add in some color to these rocks, because even though there's going to be a lot of snow here, it's conceivable not the entire rock would be completely covered by snow, although a lot of it would. So I thought it would be good to help the effect along by just Dry brushing on some various colors. First started off with a gray, and then added in some gray blue, just to give it some variation there. And what I'm doing now is I'm just going along the peaks where the snow would accumulate, just to kind of, again, enhance the effects there. Make it look frosted over. And also I want it to blend in with the ground a little bit. I know the snow is going to cover, the snow effects is going to cover a lot of this, but I thought it'd be good rather than having a sharp line there, get it to blend a little bit at least with the white base here. And I've decided to go ahead and apply a little bit of diluted white paint here, because I know the snow effect is going to be white. I just want to make sure it matches up okay with all of them. I'm not sure this is completely necessary, but thought it would blend things together a little bit better. So what I decided to do here is to add in just a little blue in some of the deeper recesses of the snow, just to give us some variation in color. I'm blending some of the white back in as we go along here. Well, not sure you can appreciate the variation in color here, but this is how it turned out. So I'm going to let this dry, and then we're ready to put on the snow effect. And I'm going to be using this little cup filter that I've got here. It's got a pretty fine screen mesh there. And we're just going to be putting the powder into it, and then just tapping it so we'll sprinkle the snow onto the surface. To adhere the snow, I'm going to be using hairspray. Well, this is after a couple layers now have been applied, and you can see the look is very convincing. So I'm going to let this dry for a while, and then we'll spray on a bit more hairspray and add a little bit more. And I'm really happy that I did end up putting down some of that blue, because it's really coming through. I don't think you'll be able to see it on the video camera, but it adds a really nice effect. Well, as I waited for the display base to dry, I wanted to see if I could create some baggage. Now, when you watch the episode, when they left the shuttle, they put a bunch of supplies on top of the Landram, and most of them look like duffel bags. It wasn't like a hard case luggage or anything. And so I went online to see if I could find anybody that made any sort of baggage that I could 3D print. Couldn't find anything, so I decided to see if I could sculpt my own. And these are made of epoxy sculpt putty. Very simple. I just kind of shaped what I thought would look like a bag, let them dry, and then I painted them. The handles I created with just using a thin styrene rod. You can see here just using a candle to create those tight bends, and just attached them with super glue. And what I need to do next now is to create some sort of strap that's going to bind them together. I think the best approach here is to glue these together into one piece, and then create some sort of strap that's going to go from one end to the other. I have tried in the past. I remember creating some seat belts for the Reimagined series Raptor for the pilots, and so I'm going to revisit a couple videos to see how to do that again, and so I will catch you up with this in just a second. Well, I got a little bit ahead of myself. I ended up misting on the base color mixed with white over the Landram, and so now all the markings look frosted over, which is looking good. I also did the same thing to the tracks, and I mistakenly did it to the baggage. And I say that because I was supposed to make the straps first prior to doing this, so I'm going to have to make the straps and mist those over with the same color, but we'll get back to that in just a bit. Now, before I get started with creating these straps and belts, I just want to make note I cannot take credit for this technique. This is something I came across on a YouTube channel, Scale Models, and what I'm going to provide for you here is just a brief summary on how to do this. If you want to see this in more detail, I'd recommend checking out the video. I'm placing the link below. The video is only 8 minutes long. The guy does a great job narrating it, and I was particularly impressed with his ability to use forceps. He uses them to feed the belts through, the belt buckles and so forth. And I tried this. I wasn't quite as smooth as he was. I think the guy must be a surgeon. But check out the video. Again, the link is below. Step 1 is the creation of the buckles, which starts by wrapping copper wire around this 1/8 inch piece of styrene. Any wiring can do, I just happen to have this on hand. Next, you snip one side to end up with individual pieces. I flatten them, close them, and then placed him onto a strip of masking tape. Next, you snip a small strip of wire and superglue to create a crossbar. Then snip off the excess on each side. Following this, you cut strips of masking tape, taper one side, then feed it through the buckle. It takes a little patience, but it isn't too hard to do. Now also note that there is an extra piece of slightly curled masking tape that was glued into place on one edge of the buckle, and this is to give the illusion that the belt coming from the other side was completely fed through. I then painted the straps, and I chose to use an olive green color. Once dry, I painted on some detailing to mimic stitching, and also added some highlights along the side. The buckles were painted black, then with gunmetal. And this is how they turned out. Okay, well, it's now time to finish up the lighting, and I do have the SMDs now that are going to illuminate these 4 lamps up here. And the way it's going to work is by using this little piece I've constructed here. This is a 0.06 by 0.08 inch styrene rod. The SMDs are going to mount right here on the front side. You can see I'm using my mechanical pencil here to dot where they have to be put into place. And this happens to slide right into that little slot. There's a slot right there behind those 4 openings, and you can see this slides right in place. And the advantage of having that extra rod allows me the ability to move it back and forth so I align everything, and it's going to be the main point I'm going to be adding in super glue to secure everything. Now, I did thin this down a little bit, and as you can see I created some notches there to account for the wires coming from the SMDs. You might ask yourself, why not just put in fiber optics? And the reason I'm not doing that is fiber optics would just create a dot of light, and I want to really mimic the look of a headlamp, so I want that light to disperse from the light source in a way that a headlamp would. You'll have the flare around it and so forth, so it really will look like a headlight. So here are the SMDs now attached to the piece. I did test this by sliding it into that slot, and it doesn't slide all the way in. I was afraid of that because there's really not a lot of play there, not a lot of room, and this is just thick enough with the super glue in place there that's preventing it to slide right up against those openings. But that doesn't matter, actually. They're close enough to illuminate those headlamps. Let me go ahead and show you with this quick light test, and as you can see, they are adequately illuminating those headlamps. Alright, well, the lights are now installed. In addition, I put in some windows, one for the main window and also along the sides here. And then I used clear smoke from Tamiya to darken them up, because I don't really want to be able to see any detail. There's no detail to see inside anyway, but might be able to see the light glow through a little bit. But I didn't want them completely open either. Now, as for the display, I have the wiring all set. We've got the battery pack in place. The switch is glued in here. We've got the wiring fed through the opening. I have the plastic pieces now that I'll be mounting onto the sides here to finish it up, and I even have the hole cut out on one side for the switch. Now, one other thing I wanted to share with you, which I've been holding off because I've been debating whether or not to do this, is this painting that I'm creating for the backdrop. The display and the Landram can certainly stand on its own as is, but I thought it would look a bit more dramatic if we had the snowy mountains in the background here. And so this painting is pretty much completed now, and I will show you how this looks in the final reveal. In the meantime, let me go ahead and get a few things together. We're getting really close to the end here. So I went ahead and glued the treads to the base, and the next thing was to apply some snow effects to the treads. And this is done with using a paste made from the snow powder combined with hairspray. Being that it's hairspray, gives it the ability to adhere to the surface that you are applying it onto. And the task here now is to make these treads look like they've trudged through snow, so I have to apply some of this paste onto the treads themselves and into the wheels. And you can see I'm also building up the area around the tread tracks. Now, after I was done with applying all of this, I decided to spray on a mist of hairspray using my airbrush, just as an extra step to make sure everything adheres properly. Well, I've now attached the lights, as you can see here, to the power source. And just in case you're wondering, I did glue back the piece that I cut out to provide better access for lighting. This was done by gluing on a piece of styrene on each side, creating a tab that helped me to position and glue it back into place. And the top of the Landram now is glued onto the tracks here, or the treads. So ready to use the Crycell Ice and Snow Wash. This is going to simulate now the buildup of frost and snow all along the corners, nooks, and crannies. Well, actually not too much to show here. What I did was I shook the bottle really well, and using a brush I started to apply a light coating first, kind of thinking about where snow and frost would accumulate, so you're looking at corners and edges. And then I combined it now using some of the paste into the mix just to create a thicker mixture. And this was applied all along the doors, as you can see here on the side. And eventually applied this to the turret, the bags, and so forth. And one thing I plan on doing as I finish this up is to apply a fine mist of hairspray and sprinkle on just a little bit more snow. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this up, and I will show you the completed project in just a second. So here we have the completed Cozmic Scale Models Original Series Battlestar Galactica Landram. At 1/56 in scale, this is a smaller kit measuring only 3 1/4 inches in length, but it is nicely detailed and looks to be a very good replica of the vehicle from the show. Now, I knew from the start this would be an easy, straightforward build, but what I hope I was able to demonstrate here is that with a little extra time and effort, you can add a lot to even the simplest of models. My goal here was to create a scene from one of my favorite episodes, Gun on Ice Planet Zero, which required the model to be detailed and weathered with snow and ice effects, and also needed to be placed onto a display which would depict the very cold planet's surface. My plan also called for lighting the kit, as well as creating some other details like the baggage that was carried on top of the Landram. I started by painting and detailing the tracks, then moved on to the main body, painting it with a base color that was a combination of Vallejo's white gray and pale gray blue. Since I was lighting the kit, I elected to first apply a coat of black paint before spraying on the base color in order to help out with light blocking. I found that doing so also seemed to enhance the sharp corners of the panels and surface details, which was a nice unexpected effect. Lighting was accomplished by using Nano SMDs for the main headlights and pico-sized SMDs for the upper lights, all from evandesigns.com. As you can see, they were a perfect choice as they do a great job mimicking the look of actual headlamps. The lights are powered by a AAA battery pack, also from Evans Designs. Now, in the episode, the crew had loaded supplies and bags onto the roof of the Landram after leaving behind the shuttle they had crashed in, and this was one detail I had fun in creating. The duffel bags seen here were made using epoxy sculpt putty, and the straps were created using a technique I had come across on YouTube. I'm really happy with the way they turned out, and the snow and ice effects really added a nice touch. The display was fairly easy to make as well, and these days I really try to use materials that are lightweight and simple to use. I've used the combination of Foamular and Sculpy air dry clay before, and it again proved to be a good choice here. Sculpting and shaping the terrain and rocks were pretty simple, and with this product you simply allow it to air dry, which only took about a day and a half. No baking is needed. The stuff is much easier and cleaner to work with versus using plaster of Paris as I've done in the past. To create the snow effects, I chose to use products from Precision Ice and Snow, which resulted in a very realistic and convincing display base. The snow powder was easy to apply onto the base, and the snow and ice wash added some nice effects to the Landram. The products used here can be found at their website, precisioniceandsnow.com, and I've placed a link below. And finally, something that I was going back and forth with was creating a painting for this display. At first I thought it would be too much for the small kit, but I moved ahead with it anyway, and I'm glad I did. The painting was done on an 8x8 canvas board that I bought at Michael's, but I trimmed 2 inches off the height, which worked out much better. And I decided to add in an extra moon to give the scene an exotic alien world feel. Well, before wrapping up, just a quick word about figures because someone brought this up as I was posting progress pictures on my Facebook pages. I didn't intend on putting any figures to begin with. The model didn't come with any figures. I just originally planned on just putting the Landram into a terrain display, as you see there. But when the question came up, it made me recall that in the episode when they were first loading themselves onto the Landram, there were two characters that were stuck or crammed into that turret. So I actually started looking at some sites that you could buy STL files from. I was thinking that perhaps military figures would be appropriate, particularly a tank crew, because if they were going to fit in that turret, I think that would look right. And I did come across one figure that looked pretty promising, but unfortunately you had to spend $40 because the file also came with a ton of other figures. And because I am not an armor builder or a tank builder, I didn't foresee the need of using those figures in the future. I decided to just set that idea aside. However, the turret still remains open, so if I do happen to come across a figure that might work, it's still possible to be able to paint and detail the figure and put them into the Landram. So that is going to do it for now, and I hope you enjoyed following along. This was really a fun project to work on. I really do enjoy these projects where I'm able to come up with different ideas to incorporate into the build, and so hope you had fun following along the build. Alright, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me here on my YouTube channel or at interceptedmodeler@gmail.com. Coming up next, released on the heels of this one, is going to be the Starfleet HQ Air Tram. This is another model from Cozmic Scale Models. I had hoped to have both of these done by now, but I fell a little bit behind my schedule, as you know. One other thing I wanted to mention here, as I intended by now to also be coming up with some content to commemorate my 10-year anniversary here on YouTube. I still do intend to do that, but I'm going to push that aside for a little bit, because coming up real quickly here is Wonderfest, and we're already in the middle of April here, and May's going to be on us before you know it, so I wanted to try to squeeze in one more project. I'm not going to talk too much about the project because I might not even get to it, but if I do, I'll let you know. Alright guys, thanks again for watching. It is a pleasure, and take care. I will see you in the next video.